4bats has had an undoubtedly crazy come up this year. Since June of 2023, when he dropped his first track, he has been the subject of a major label bidding war, had a Drake feature, and got a co-sign from Kanye West, all in less than a year. It's fair to say he is making some serious waves in the industry right now. However, what I think is even more interesting than his story so far is how he blends these woozy, emotive beats with time-stretched vocals to create a sound that's pretty unique in the R&B landscape right now. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can make 4bats type beats for yourself and capture that moody aesthetic that he's used to achieve huge success so far. Stay tuned for an in-depth breakdown on chord structures, sound selection, drum programming, and how to take these beats from simple to stunning in just a few minutes. So to start off this beat, I thought it was crucial to just get some chords in and catch a vibe and get into that whole dark, moody kind of headspace to actually make something that was going to live up to what 4bats has been putting out, because his beats are crazy. So to start with, I grabbed a Rhodes and played in this sort of dark sounding chord progression using minor chords, some 7ths, 9ths, 11ths, and it sounds like this. As far as processing, I didn't really do too much to it. I just added this EQ, taking out some low end from the middle channel. I left the sides alone. That preset had some nice reverb on it already. I just rolled with it and let it go as it is. So next up, I wanted to get in some drums. 4bats likes to use a mix of sampled and live drums. So to start with, I grabbed some samples from my Oasis drum kit, couple of kicks and 2 perks which I was going to use as snares. Then I also grabbed some live sounding hi-hats from Addictive Drums, sound like this. And I grabbed some toms as well, which sound like this. And I played in this really cool little pattern which sounds like this. So one thing I wanted to highlight on the drums on this is that I used a hefty amount of swing. If you see when I zoom in here, these are pretty off-grid. I've put the snare a little bit ahead and the kicks tend to be fairly behind the beat. And that just gave me that kind of woozy, laid-back kind of vibe that was perfect for 4bats. So you can just see how that makes you groove along to it a lot more than you would if all those notes were just perfectly locked to the grid. So definitely play around with swing when you're making beats in this kind of style. Now, as far as drum processing goes, I added some tape saturation using the Studer. I also added some parallel processing using Devil Lock, and I added a little room reverb. So without that processing, we have this, which is fine, lacking a little bit of energy though. And then when we add the processing back in, you get that punch, a bit of grit, and that sounds so nice to me. So now I had the drums in, what was next? Bass. 4bats likes to use live basses most of the time, so I grabbed a P bass from Contact, loaded it up, and played in like a simple but dark sounding pattern that fit really nicely with the groove I had going, so it sounds like this. And to show you guys a cool little mixing trick I did when transitioning between sections, if you see here, I've got a Devil Lock Deluxe on the channel, and it's not doing anything most of the time. At the end of the first half of that section, when I just took out a few elements and had the bass doing the little fill, I automated that up to get a nice bit of crunch and distortion on it just for that section. So that's a really cool way you can just transition between sections easily using a bit of automation. So that sounds like this. You see that adds a bit of grit there, but it would be way too much normally. And if I take that off, it sounds like this. Just lacking a bit of luster, isn't it? And that just draws your ear in. It acts like a little bit of ear candy. So definitely mess around with that when you're making these beats, because these beats tend to be simple. You've got to kind of add in those little tricks and little bits of ear candy here and there. Otherwise, you can get the listener getting, bored of just the same sort of loop repeating over and over again. After I had the bass, drums, and the Rhodes in, I was super happy with where the beat was going, but I wanted to get a bit more ambience. So I dragged a crowd sample in from Splice, loaded it in, turned the volume down, and then processed it up a little bit with this sort of phone-shaped EQ filter, and it sounds like this. Very subtle, but if I solo it out, it's just people talking, but it adds so much ambience in to the rest of the beat when the other elements are playing. So Now I had these basic elements in, I wanted to arrange the beat out into sections and then add some extra magic to it to really elevate it and take it to the next level. So I started with the simple intro and then arranged it out into sort of a chorus section, and then I got to a kind of natural drop-in energy, and I decided that would be my verse. But with just the Rhodes in there and no drums, things were sounding a little bit dry, so I added in an extra chord element using the Prophet 6 with just some simple E piano chords but with some glide between them, and it sounded really nice. So let's hone in on that section. So the Prophet sounds like this on its own. In terms of effects, we've got a Pro Q3, nice simple curve, going into a crystalline, going to a little bit of chorus, and that's a free plugin, so you guys should grab that one if you want. So with the Prophet in the mix, we have this. It's pretty subtle, but it just adds that nice sort of depth and shimmer that the Rhodes alone wouldn't provide, and also it stops things getting stale because the Rhodes has been heard for the whole beat so far. And you'll notice there, we just had a nice little drum fill taking us into some more chilled out drums. With those drums, I'm using the same sounds, but I just added in this small fill just to transition us into the second half of the verse and signal that the energy was going to rise a little bit. And I also switched the snare sound to use the other perk instead of this more rimmy-like sound, just to give a bit of variation again. With the verse sort of handled, we were getting back into the next chorus, where I wanted to raise the energy even more. But I was worried that the Rhodes was going to get a bit boring and a bit repetitive sounding, so I thought I'd go over to the piano and play some similar chords into the Rhodes, but using the piano instead, and they sound like this. And as far as processing goes, we've just got an S1 imager on here, and then this Valhalla Supermassive, which you might notice is on 0 mix, and that's because I'm doing a cool automation trick with that for the end of the song that I'll get into in a second. Man, these chords are so nice though. Lovely. Now, those chords are beautiful, but I thought they were lacking a bit of energy. They were pretty simple. So I added in this additional piano melody to go over the top, just to give a little bit of extra speed and this kind of energy to this part. So that sounds like this. Super nice. And all that has on is a simple S1 imager pushing it out really wide because I wanted that to be nicely in the sides. So when we bring those piano chords and melody into the mix, we have this. I kept the Rhodes in there along with the Prophet, but I just turned them down a fair bit because we didn't really need all that extra energy going at the same time. So with that section sounding awesome, I wanted to add some extra elements to really elevate the beat and stop it just being like a simple repetitive loop playing over and over again. So first off, I reached for some horns, and they sound like this. I'm just playing one solo horn and 2 trumpets, all playing sort of very similar lines. And in the mix, they sound super subtle. In terms of processing, we've got a needle point on there to make it sound more sampled. This EQ taking off some top end, a nice little bit of chorus, a phaser, and a chamber reverb also sounding super nice. Now, for the last chorus and the outro, I wanted a really smooth transition, so I reached for some strings. Now, I started off with this simple violin melody, layered it up with another violin, added a cello for some of the low end and a bit more depth, and lastly, a viola to fill in that middle range. And that sounds gorgeous if you ask me. So with the strings there in the final chorus smoothly taking us into the outro, we have this. In terms of processing, we've got a needle point again to make it sound more sampled, a nice reverb, stereo imager pushing those out to the sides, simple LA2A just barely tickling the needle, and a Pro Q just rolling off a bit of top end. And now to show you this automation trick that I mentioned earlier, without that Valhalla on there, the beat ends just like this. Bit abrupt, a bit sudden. I wanted it to kind of ring out a bit and keep that moody vibe going right till the end. So I added this Valhalla on there and just automated the mix knob up for the last chord, and with that you get so much more depth and energy to it at the end, so it sounds like this. So that's everything in the beat. In my next video, I'll be going into depth on how to create vocals in 4/8 style, including how to do all the time stretching and pitch shifting and making that sound awesome and fit in with the beat. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, here's the final beat. Let's take a listen. See you in the next one. Peace.